The Indian may be technically free to vote, to stay on his reservation or to leave it, to take part in state and federal government. But that freedom amounts to precious little when he must struggle every day against heavy odds to feed and clothe and shelter his family. He may be technically free, but he is the victim of social and economic oppressions that hold him in bondage.
Before the Kennedy administration, we had been in a period of time that most people know as the termination era. The Kennedy administration reached out directly to tribes in a way that had never been done before and worked with tribal governments. And the speech to NCAI was the first opportunity to see that in practice, where a cabinet level official, the president's brother, actually met with tribal leaders on a one-on-one basis.
The speech to me was very significant because not only did the president's plan, his 10-point pledge to Indian tribes, signal an effort to include Indians in the anti-poverty approach of the administration, but he concluded with the importance of building very cooperative relationships between federal officials and Indian tribal officials. And I think that was an essential ingredient to everything positive that's happened since that time.
John Kennedy was one of the first candidates to ever talk about the plight of the American Indian and the sheer poverty in which we were living. Bobby Kennedy crystallized that by talking about the responsibility of the federal government to ameliorate some of those conditions we were living in.
Over my career and through my involvement with different components of the department, I've come to understand that there are no group of people in the United States that are more impacted by the Department of Justice than Indian people.
Anybody who's lived and worked in Indian country understands there's an ebb and flow to the relationship that the federal government has with tribes. I think where we really have seen an uptick is in this last administration, where we have seen more outreach to tribes, more direct contact with tribes than we've seen in, I think, any period in American history, perhaps. Early on in his administration, Attorney General Holder expressed a desire to go out and meet with people in Indian country. And what we wanted was for an opportunity to actually engage with individuals. So we set up a meeting of tribal leaders, and we invited all tribal leaders across the country to St. Paul to talk with the Attorney General about their needs and their hopes for Indian country.
So one of the outgrowths of the very historic listening session that was attended by the top 3 leaders of the department, and we're engaging with hundreds of tribal leaders, was a commitment to not just have listened, but to try to solve the problems that were identified by the tribal leaders.
The Attorney General was able to have a conversation, to understand, I believe, what their issues were, and to reach forward to set the policies that are guiding us now today. And that conversation was unique and very important.
The tribe is only truly a sovereign nation and a government when it operates and it fully operates all aspects of it, including law enforcement and jurisdiction over its own people. And so we appreciate the relationship what we have with the U.S. Department of Justice, because they help facilitate that. And so we have a very good symbiotic relationship with the U.S. Department of Justice.
We've done a lot of good work in this administration from Washington, but law enforcement happens in the field. It happens on the ground with police officers and prosecutors, victim service advocates. And those people for the Department of Justice are the U.S. attorneys. And the U.S. attorneys have done more in Indian country in this last 5 years than has happened in the previous 50 years. One of the things I think that is unique about this administration is their focus on making sure that the strides forward that we have taken are preserved in the future.
You know, Indian country has some of the highest rates of domestic abuse in America. And one of the reasons is that when Native American women are abused on tribal lands by an attacker who is not Native American, the attacker is immune from prosecution by tribal courts. Well, as soon as I sign this bill, that ends. That ends.
Probably the major legislative accomplishment of this administration vis-a-vis Indians was the Violence Against Women Act, where the Department of Justice worked directly with tribes to draft legislation that provided for the protection of Indian women.
At one point during that process of trying to persuade members to support the bill, I recall a conversation between some tribal leaders and the Attorney General, in which the tribal leaders mentioned that they were beginning to consider some compromises. And the Attorney General, without a pause, implored these leaders to work with us cooperatively, to come back to us before they considered doing anything like that, because he didn't want to settle for anything less than 100% win.
Almost 50 years ago, Attorney General Kennedy went to the Pine Ridge Reservation. And he went to the Pine Ridge Reservation because the Pine Ridge Reservation is a tough place. It has a very high poverty rate. And he went there because he wanted to reach out to the people who needed, our help, the federal government's assistance most. And while he was there, he went to the Wounded Knee Memorial Site. And it's my understanding when he was there, he said that this is a very sacred place and I wish I had brought flowers to lay at the burial site. So fast forward about 50 years. Pine Ridge is still a tough place. And Attorney General Holder wanted to go there because, we know we can't duck problems. We have to address them face on. So he went to Pine Ridge, he met with the tribal leaders, he met with a lot of the traditional tribal leaders. But towards the end of his visit, he asked to go to the Wounded Knee Memorial Site himself. And at that time, with then President John Steele, the Attorney General Holder laid a wreath, the wreath that Attorney General Kennedy wanted to lay at that Wounded Knee Memorial Site. And it was a moment I will remember, and I think everybody there will remember for the rest of their lives.